David Hood, just making a running commentary while I read in a CSV file into R. So I've installed R from CRAN, for whatever operating system, and I've installed whatever are the appropriate extra bits. So in Windows I'd have installed R tools, and in the Mac version I would have installed the appropriate extra material for the version I'm working with. I've also downloaded R Studio desktop version for the appropriate kind of computer I'm on, so I'll be using that with R. And for the CSV file, I'm using the New Zealand Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment Weekly Fuel Price Monitoring CSV file, which has a weekly table of fuel price data. I have downloaded that, and that file is sitting in a folder on my desktop. The folder is called Fuel. Just to show you what that file looks like before I begin working with it in R, it's a big rectangle of data with one row of headings at the top, and that's a very good way of shifting data between different computer programs. So I'm in R, and first of all I'm going to tell R what folder to pay attention to. This is a nice easy way for beginners to have the right folder. I went Session Menu, Set Working Directory, and then I say this is the folder I'm paying attention to today. This is my project folder. So Sessions, Set Working Directory, and I chose the directory. That wrote the setwd command in parentheses in, and inside the parentheses was some text in quotes that is the technical path to that folder. And you can kind of think of this a lot like functions in Excel. There are words R knows about, there are parentheses, and there is stuff inside the parentheses, in this case a bit of text saying where to go. You can also think of this as a lot like a kitchen spice grinder. I'm feeding an ingredient into the funnel, and then R is grinding it up according to the kind of spice grinder it is. I've told R where to look, but for writing out the commands, I could type directly into what's called the console. I won't have a permanent record of what I've done. So I'm going up to the File menu, I'm going to New File, and I'm going to create an R script, a reproducible audit trail of what I'm doing that I can run again in the future and tweak and things like that. So for reading in the file, I might use the read CSV command. As I start typing it, R is making a suggestion of possible commands. I could up or down arrow key it and hit tab to finish that typing. Now I need to say read CSV, and I need to, in this case, say the name of the file as a bit of text in quote marks, and the name of that file was weekly table CSV. So I could select it and copy and paste and add .csv, as I didn't get that as part of the copy. And to actually make that command happen, I could hit the run command at the top of the screen, or command return on a Macintosh, or control enter on a Windows machine. When I do that, what it's done is spilled the CSV file all over the console, because I fed the ingredients into the spice grinder, it ground it up, but then it went all over the benchtop. So the next thing I'm going to do is store it in a jar. In this case, I'm going to give a label for the place I want to store it, fuel, and I'm going to build an arrow with a less than and a hyphen. So it's going to take the name of the file, feed that into the function for reading the CSV, then it's going to follow the arrow and store it in this jar called fuel. Technically it's a thing called an object, but when I run that now, it just ran down in console. Not a lot of extra stuff happened, because in R, when nothing goes wrong, it just goes and does its thing as a rule of thumb. Over in the environment area, it's now saying you've got this thing called fuel. It's 847 observations, 847 rows of 25 variables, 25 columns. If I wanted to find out about this fuel, I might take this jar of stuff and feed it into another function, like the summary of the fuel. And if I ran that, I get column by column summaries of all of the different columns in the data. But summary isn't actually the most useful command for checking things. The most useful one is one called str for tell me about the structure of this. And the reason the structure is so important is that the kind of data you're working with controls the kind of questions you are asking. So if I just roll up to console, it's saying it's a data frame, 847 observations of 25 variables. The first column is called week ending Friday. It's what's called a factor, a form of text. The second column is week number. It's also a factor, form of text. It's got a little W in the middle of some numbers. Status is a factor. And then I've got a whole bunch of numeric columns. Dubai crude USD, NZ US X rate, Dubai crude NZD, .p, .bbl, and other strange and mysterious columns. This matters because you can only ask date questions of date columns. You can only ask number questions on number columns. You can only do maths and numbers. And where it was saying factor, there are two kinds of text. To borrow a very good illustration from Alison Horst, their text, if it's a factor, is ordinal data. It's got labels, but it's also got a rank. So you need to be very careful about, are you talking about the labels, the text, or the rank? And with the version of R I'm using, the default way of reading in text was as a factor for this function. The other way of handling text, it's just called characters, and that's what's called nominal. It's just different labels of things. So it doesn't have an order and it doesn't get treated as numbers. And I might look at this and think, well, that's potentially going to cause a bit of confusion for me later on. So I'm going to go back to that first command where I read things in, and I'm going to add another setting for changing the behavior. I'll type in a comma, a space for a separate setting, and I'm going to take a shortcut for typing more stuff in RStudio. I'll hit the tab key to bring up a list of possible settings. So these are things like how to handle number of rows, how many rows should I actually read in, and as I arrow key up and down it is giving me the little description. Should I skip some lines at the start of the file? But the setting I'm actually looking for is one called strings as factors. Should characters be converted to factors? I'll hit the tab key to get it to type it for me, and then I will yell false at it in capital letters. So I'm saying read in the file, but as a change of ingredient to the spice mix, I want strings as factors. No, just leave it as characters. If I run this line again, I've still got fuel, 847 observation of 25 variables, but if I rerun the str line, running again, now those first few columns that were bits of text, they're character columns, so they're going to handle a bit differently, and I can ask different kinds of questions of them. And looking at the week ending Friday column, that's a date column, but it's still reading it as a character. So I could go back to the read CSV function again and add yet more settings, getting to a very fine level of detail, but I could also change the kind of column it is after the fact, either using built-in functions or ones from added helper libraries. And in the bottom right corner of R, there's a packages tab that shows all the helper libraries that are installed inside my copy of R, including ones I've added myself. Up the top is an install button. I click on that and I type out the name of a helper library I've heard is very handy. And Lubridate, I've heard, is a great library for working with dates. There's a little ticky box for install dependencies for if this helper library needs other helper libraries, sort this all out for me. So I click install, it goes off onto the internet, gathers up all the helper libraries I might need. That means it's on my computer, but it's not actually available yet. I can't use the commands from the library until I've actually loaded it. The book may be in the library, but I need to take it out. And to do that, I'm going to use a library command to go to the library and take out Lubridate. That activates the commands in Lubridate. And now I could, for example, from looking at STRA and understanding my data and looking at the fact that it was year, month and day arrangement, I could use the YMD function in Lubridate if I knew it existed, which I do, and I'm going to say that fuel jar, and then I'm going to use the $sign because the $sign is the reaching inside symbol in R, and reaching inside that I see all the various columns, and I want the week ending Friday. If I run that as is, again it spills all over the desktop. So I want to store it somewhere by building the little arrow. Where do I want to store it? I could store it in a completely separate jar, a new label, then it would appear over in the environment area. Or I could say I am storing it in fuel, but I could use the $sign for reaching inside again and just invent a new column name. Whatever it might be that makes sense. So this is saying take the fuel data, reach inside to find the week ending Friday column, feed it into the YMD function, which is expecting text dates in year, month, day format, and turns it into actual dates, and then put that inside the fuel data in a new column called weekly. And if I run that, it's gone to the same number of rows, but it's added one variable, one column. I've now got 26 of them. And that new column is a column I could ask date questions of.